right. All right, let's begin, everybody. The very first question, a government department provides milk at no charge to very low income families. Which term best describes the milk? You guys can give me the answer in the chat box, or you guys can come on the microphone and speak the answer. Fahira, you're saying C. And Karen says C. Yeah, so it is a private good because a public good has got certain aspects to it. And I think, Karen, you would understand this question better because you think you were talking about this in paper 2 as well, in this year's session, when they confused between private and public good. So public good is non-extinguishable, non-rivalrous, and yeah, non-extinguishable. So there's a problem of free rider. Milk is a separate story, right? It's not an inferior good. We wouldn't consider it into that category. As people's income rise, they do not stop consuming milk, and it's not a free good, certainly. So the answer is C. Good job, Karen. Moving on to and Fahira, you too as well. Moving on to the next question, which statement is a normative statement? Which statement is a normative statement? Option A, China has never had a balance of payment surplus. Higher interest rates might reduce investment. Welfare payments should be increased. Perfect competition is allocatively efficient. You guys both have answered option D. Option D is the correct answer because the difference between positive and normative statement is that a positive statement is something that of a phenomenon that is experienced, that is based on facts, right? That is not purely a judgment or something of an opinion, right? When we say that welfare payment should be increased, the opinion could differ. For some people could say that it should be decreased, and some people say that it should be increased, and some could say that it should be decreased. So it's a normative statement. It's not a positive statement. We're going to go with option D here. The third question, what do economists regard as reward for taking risks? What do economists regard as reward for taking risks and organizing production? Profit. Yes, the entrepreneurs actually take the risk, and they are the ones that start up the businesses and organize production. And the reward for that is that they seek to earn profit. All right, the next question. The British pound is the national currency of UK. In Brixton, in South London, it is possible to get a distinctively marked currency called the, just a second, yeah. In Brixton, in South London, it is possible to get a distinctively marked currency called the Brixton pound from special cash machines. This can be spent with 150 local shopkeepers. Similar schemes are found in towns in the US, Italy, and France. Should Brixton pounds be considered as money? Option A, it says no, because it is not possible to have two currencies in the country. It says no, because they're not generally acceptable outside of Brixton. And here, yes, because some are willing to accept them because they fulfill all the functions of money. The answer, you guys have answered D, because yes, they do fulfill all the functions of money. Even if some shopkeepers are willing to accept something, it wouldn't be considered as money as long as it's not fulfilling all the functions of money. That it should be generally acceptable as a medium of exchange. It should be unit of account. It should be a measure of value and medium of deferred payment, mode of deferred payment. So yeah, like D would be the correct option. Next, question number 5. When stating the law of demand for a good, economists use the phrase all other things being equal. What is not one of these all other things? What is not one of these all other things? The price of the good. Yeah, the price of other goods is other factor. The income of consumer is other factor. The taste of consumer is the other factor as well. The price of that good in itself is, it's not the all other things, but everything except for the price is considered as other things because we're actually showing a relationship between the price and quantity demanded. And we consider that everything except for the price it stays equal, it does not change. And as the price changes, how does the quantity demand change? Right? That's how we actually define the law of demand. It's a price quantity relationship. All right. The answer you guys selected option C. C, rather good. Yeah. For question number 6, what will not cause a shift in the market supply of a commodity? What will not cause a shift in the market supply of a commodity? A change in technology is going to cause a shift. A rise in the price of factor input is going to cause a shift in the market supply. A rise in the price of the commodity. Obviously, as the price rises, you see, for here, you need to understand here that supply curve actually in itself is a price quantity relationship. As the price rises, the quantity supply rises as well. That's why you see the supply curve is upward sloping from left to right, right? If you see the supply curve, I cannot draw a diagram right now here, but if you remember the supply curve, that's how it is. What causes the shift in the supply curve is the quantity and the quality of the factors of production which are used in the production of goods and services. So when we say that there's a change in technology, there's the factors of production in terms of the quality, the quantity, the capabilities of the businesses to produce goods and services increases. So that's why the supply curve shift to it, right? When you say a rise in the price of factor input, you see that factor inputs is a cost, it accounts in the production process itself, and it actually affects the cost of production. As the cost of production rises because of an increase in the price of the factor input, the supply curve shifts towards left. In option D, the introduction of a specific tax on the commodity. You understand that whenever there will be an introduction of tax on a commodity, its supply curve will shift towards left. And whenever there will be a provision of a subsidy by the government, its supply curve will shift towards right. If you remember that, Fahira. Do you remember that? Yes, okay. So the correct answer is going to be option C, because a rise in the price of the commodity is going to cause a movement in the supply curve, not a shift in the supply curve. So that's why C is the correct answer here. Makes sense, right? Moving on to the next question, guys. Question 7. A product has a low price elasticity of supply. What might explain this? A product has a low price elasticity of supply. The product has a low opportunity cost. This product is highly perishable. B makes sense, because if something is highly perishable, you cannot actually stock it up. So even if the price goes up, the suppliers cannot increase the quantity supplied very significantly, because they cannot then store their supplies. And the product is class and inferior good. The product is considered as a necessity. The product has a low opportunity cost. If product is a low opportunity cost, elasticity would be high, not low. Understand that. All right, the product is highly perishable. B is the correct answer over here, guys. You got that one. Moving on to the next one. A car manufacturer estimates that the price elastic supply for its cars is plus 2.5. What will be the impact of a 10% increase in price? Yeah, this one's interesting. What's the correct answer, guys? Karen says D. What does Fahira say? Fahira, what do you say about this one?
Sir, I'm calculating it.
All right, okay. Take your time. Yes, Fahira, you said D. Yes, you can calculate it, or you could directly kind of cross out all the answers that you have over there, because you see, price elastic supply of 2.5 means that a 10% increase would mean 2.5 times that of 10% increase in quantity supplied. Because what's the formula? Percentage change in quantity supplied divided by percentage change in price is equals to 2.5. So percentage change in quantity supplied divided by percentage change in price of 10% is equals to 2.5. So the percentage change in quantity supplied would be 25%. 25% divided by 10% is equal to 2.5. So if you just ignored the first three options, you would have directly gotten to option D. Or if you just did the calculation, if you did the Fahira, so if you did the calculation for the elasticity, you would understand that it's a 25% rise in quantity supplied. A 10% increase in price results in 25% rise in quantity supplied. Very simple question. Just made it a little bit complicated for you to be able to understand the other details as well. I hope you've benefited. Moving on to the next question. The diagram shows the original demand curve D1 and supply curve S1 for diesel cars in Europe. Point X is the initial equilibrium. So here's your demand curve D1 and your supply curve S1 for diesel cars in Europe. Point X, the initial equilibrium. Here's your equilibrium at X. There's a successful advertising campaign by electric car producers. So you understand that you're a diesel car producer. The diagram is about a diesel car producer in Europe, right? And there's a successful advertising campaign for electric cars. So what would happen to the demand or the supply of diesel cars? That's what you need to think. And there's a new unit tax on diesel cars. There's a little tax on the diesel cars, which the diagram is about. What's going to happen to its supply or its demand? And which will be our new equilibrium? Good answer, Karen. Demand for substitute will decrease. Yeah, because the advertisement campaign is successful, the demand for the diesel cars is going to decrease. So demand curve will shift to D2. And because of the imposition of the unit tax, what's going to happen to the supply curve? Because of the new unit tax, what's going to happen to the supply curve? The supply curve will shift leftwards. Yes, so where do we reach now? After our demand has decreased and our supply has decreased, our new equilibrium point would be D. Yep. All right, moving on to the next question, guys. Question number 10. A UK-based company wishes to diversify its product range. To finance this, it has obtained a $10 million loan from a bank to buy land, build, and equip a bakery. What would not be classified by an economist as a factor of production? A land on which the factory will be built, the oven required to bake the bread, the soya used in the making of the bread, the tenant loan used for. Yeah, this question is interesting here, guys. Karen says A. Land and oven, of course, it's understood. The land in itself, the premises on which the bakery is built, the land itself, the land for the bakery itself is considered as land in economic terms, and oven is considered as capital, right? Now you have got the option, two options left, option A and option D. The soya that is used in the making of the bread and the $10 million loan used to finance the project. Sir, isn't D capital as well? D, the soya. Soya is the ingredient that is used in making the bread. So it's not capital, certainly not capital. $10 million loan used to finance the project. That's option A. Some people would consider that as capital and perhaps get confused. But you need to understand that it is from the perspective of an economist. I don't know what your option is, Fahira. But let me just clarify to you that in accounts, from the accounts perspective, the $10 million that is used from the accounts or finance perspective, this is a capital, right? This is the equity. But here for an economist, this $10 million loan, which is used to finance a project, would not necessarily be considered as capital because by the definition of capital, we're saying man-made resources used in the production of goods and services. And soya here could be a raw material, but at the same time, it's a resource that is grown or extracted from the land. We use farming procedures in order to, produce soya. So soya is something that we have driven from the land itself. So that's why we consider it as land. So A is something that will not be classified as a factor of production. All right. This was like a little bit tricky and confusing question. A lot of students are certainly going to get confused in that one. But I hope this doubt is clear now. A country's central bank has commissioned a report on the demand for and the price of houses. What might be the most likely combination of reasons for an increase in the price and quantity demanded of houses? What might be the most likely combinations for an increase in the price and quantity demanded of houses? So you see, usually when we look into the demand curve, what happens is that as the prices go down, the quantity demand increases. But they're saying that what's going to happen that actually increases the price as well as increases the quantity demanded of the houses. So let's say income should go up, right? Income going down would not increase the demand. Income unchanged could also be acceptable, but let's look at the other sections of the answer as well. So A and B cannot be correct. Interest rates going up would not be a good reason for people to buy houses, because with interest rate become expensive, people are going to need to save. The interest rate needs to go down, yes, so that borrowing becomes cheaper. As the borrowing becomes cheaper, people borrow more and they spend more and perhaps buy houses as well. Wages of bricklayers, well, if they go down, it's good. But it's not necessarily the reason. Even if they stay unchanged, you know, so the best combination of the reasons would be option D, right? Moving on to the next one, question number 12. The diagram shows, I think, yeah, it's really relevant. You can say that. It's not necessarily irrelevant, but usually what's going to happen is that the wages of the bricklayers are dependent upon the demand of the houses. So it's not the factors that is going to actually give an incentive to the house owners or the buyers to make the purchase of the house, or is going to something going to affect the demand of the house. So in the relationship of cause and effect, incomes and interest rates are the causes and the demand of houses the effect. And similarly, the demand is the cause and the wages is the effect. It's not the other way around. You should understand this. All right. The diagram shows the outcome when a landowner who had allowed motorists to park on his field at no cost introduces a parking charge of $1. So you see, supply is inelastic because perfectly inelastic, because there are just limited number of spots available. No matter what the charge is, the supply cannot increase. It's going to stay right where it is. The demand curve being downward sloping at $1. It's the price at which the demand intersects supply, and that's the market price. What happens as a result of the change? The landowner gains a surplus of Y plus Z. So previously the landowner was getting nothing. The motorist gains a surplus of X plus Y. The motorist does not gain surplus X plus Y. The motorist continues to gain the surplus of X because it's the region above the market price. So, and below the demand curve. So the region below the demand curve and above the market price is your consumer surplus. And the region below the market price and above the supply curve. You see, above the supply curve cannot be defined here as it usually is, because supply curve is not, it's not necessarily slanted as it is. It's a straight line. But still, this region Y is what could be considered as producer surplus. And region X is what could be considered as consumer surplus. So this is about consumer and producer surplus, right? The motorist gain surplus, that would be wrong as well. The C, the ownership of surplus Y changes. The ownership of surplus Y changes. And let's look at the option D as well. In option D, it says there is a total surplus of X plus Y plus Z. You can say that Z is not your surplus. X and Y is what the surplus are, right? The regions which are above the supply curve and below the demand curve and above and below the market prices. These are your consumer and producer surpluses. All right. The ownership of surplus Y changes. So here you have, the ownership of surplus Y changes. So C is the correct answer here. Previously, the ownership of surplus Y, you can say, because it just was actually, Y was also consumer surplus previously when there was no price charged. You see, because had allowed the motorists to park on this field at no cost. And now he has actually started charging $1. So that why the reason why there was previously consumer surplus, because consumers were benefiting off of it, the region below the demand curve and above the market price. The market price was zero previously. Now that the market price $1, the region that is now below the market price and above the supply curve or within the supply curve region, that Y region previously, which was consumer surplus, has now become producer surplus. So that's why we say that the ownership of surplus Y changes. This kind of sounds confusing to some people, that what does it mean by changes? But the changes means that it was previously consumer surplus and now it has become producer surplus. Make sense, guys? Fahira, you understood it? All right, great. So this another tricky question in which the students could possibly potentially have lost marks. But alhamdulillah, we have covered this as well. Now moving on to the other question, guys. Question 13. The table gives information about the market for two models of car. There's a model of 1200cc and the other model 2000cc. The number of cars sold per week is 10,000. For the other one, there's 5,000 units. Cross elasticity of demand with respect to the price of petrol. Minus 0.25 and minus 0.5. The cross elasticity of demand means the percentage in the quantity demanded as a result of the percentage in price. So for both these cars, it's inelastic. The demand is inelastic. The cross elasticity of demand is price inelastic to the price of petrol. If the price of the cars remain unchanged, but the price of petrol increased by 100%, what will be the effect of the number of cars sold per week? Yeah, so the total number of cars sold per week is 10,000 and 5,000. The total is 15,000, right? As a result of a 100% increase in the petrol prices, there shall be a 25% decrease in the prices in the units that are sold for the first car model, that is 1200cc. And for the second one, there will be 50% decline. Correct? Yes. So now in the first one, 2,500 cars, 2,500 fewer cars will be sold of the 1200cc model because of 100% increase in the price of petrol. And here you can say that, what do you call it? 50% fewer cars will be sold. Again, 2,500 fewer cars will be sold. So the total number of cars sold per week will decrease by 5,000, which you have written here, Fahira. Do you agree with that answer, Karen, for question 13? All right. Moving on to the next question, question number 14. In many countries, there are goods that must be provided directly by the government. What would be the most convincing argument for such provision? The consumption of these goods may be beneficial. The production of these goods may be harmful. Well, this one is ridiculous. Why would the government provide something that is harmful? So B is not the correct option. The production of these products have high opportunity cost. Again, C. These productions are non-rival in consumption and non-excludable. A sounds like a good choice, Fahira, but do consider all the options, because this one here is a very subjective question. You need to make sure that you've considered all the choices and then made up your mind. The goods are directly provided by the government. Which is the most convincing argument? Karen says D, and Fahira, you're saying A. Now, both these goods, so in A, you can say that these are merit goods. The consumption of these goods may be beneficial. There might be a social benefit off of the consumption of these. There might be external or social benefit, how you call it. And so they are your merit goods. Merit goods are often provided by the government directly. But this is not the most convincing argument, because the merit goods are provided within the private sector as well. Why is it that the governments are particularly providing these goods? There are goods which must be. Why the government must provide these goods directly and not the private sector? For that, the most convincing argument here is that these products are non-rival in consumption and non-excludable. The private sector simply cannot provide these goods. Karen, you've said capital goods. What do you mean by that? Do you want to add something to it, Karen? Fahira, I hope you understood why we would go for option D and not for option A. Yeah, public goods have, no prices. Public goods do not have a price tag associated. And of course, the provision is through there's no profit incentive as well. So private sector cannot provide it and the government must provide these. Yes. Yeah, good points, Fahira. Good points. True. All true. All right, for the next question, the provision of the rail services is switched from the private sector to the public sector. What is necessarily correct? The average fare for the charge for the service will fall. This could possibly be the case, but let's look at the other options as well. The profit of the service will fall in the public sector. The rail service management responsible to different owners. There will be an increase in the number of workers employed. Again, this is a good and tricky question. Fahira, you've gone for option C, which is a smart, and Karen, you've gone for option C, which is a smart. All of these things are possible, but not necessary. You see how they've asked you the question, what is necessarily correct? So all of this can be correct, but it's not necessarily correct. But what's absolutely true is that the management will be responsible to different owners now. Previously, it was responsible to its actual owners, which were the private individuals within the private sector. And now they are responsible to the governments that are running the authorities that manage these services. All right, so it's option C. From question 16 onwards, I think it's better if we just take a break and then come back and resume our past paper. Perhaps you guys can take a break of 5 minutes. Cool? All right, so let's resume now. The diagram represents the original demand curve D1, the original supply curve S1 for electric cars. The government decides to provide subsidy to electric car manufacturers. So you understand that what's the effect of subsidy on your supply curve. You can see here the supply curve has shifted from S1 to S2. The original was S1, and after subsidy, it's most likely going to be S2. Right, which area represents the total revenue for the car manufacturer after receiving the subsidy from the government. So the total revenue of the car manufacturer after receiving the subsidy. You understand that where the new equilibrium stands, the new equilibrium is going to be point N, right? If you've identified the new equilibrium, I think it should be easy for you to now kind of identify that what your total revenue would be. You guys can give me the answers in the chat box. Here you're saying A, it's going to be OERY. All right. Let me see if the connection here, it's not stable. You guys can hear me properly, right? Karen, you're also saying it's A. Okay, the new equilibrium is at N, all right? You need to understand here that the total amount of revenue of the car manufacturer from the sales of the cars would be OGNY, which is your option C, but included in this revenue would be the revenue, would be the government subsidy as well. So like typically the supplier would be willing to charge a lower price only because of the subsidy of RN. The quantity Y would be supplied at price E, right? At a point on S1 curve, which is the original supply curve, that is R. So the total revenue of the car manufacturer could be OERY, out of which GERN is what's collected from the government in the form of subsidies, and OGNY is what is collected from the consumers at the time of selling the product to the consumers, right? So the option you said that OERY, that's the correct option. All right, moving on to the next one, question 17. What's your question 17, guys? All right. The government decides to build additional public sector housing to be rented to people receiving low incomes. The government decides to build additional public sector housing to be rented to people receiving low incomes. What is likely to fall as a result of this increase in the public sector housing? Karen goes for option C. Well, let's read the options. Fahira, you also went for option C. Let's read the options. Employment in the construction industry is going to increase because as more houses are being built, of course, there will be more employment opportunities created. Land price in the town city is going to rise because the government is now deciding to build a housing. And of course, the demand for the land is going to increase. Rent of house in the private sector. Rents of house in the private sector would fall because there will be less demand, because now many people would shift towards public sector housing as well. So the total government spending is going to increase. So C is the only option, which actually indicates something that's likely to fall as a result of an increase in the public sector housing. So yes, for question number 17, the correct option is C. Moving on to the next question, question number 18. The government spending for a year includes 3 items. What is the total of the transfer payment by this government in $1 million? So you need to understand what the transfer payments are. Can anyone of you define the transfer payments? Karen, you're saying option C. Can you define transfer payments? Yes, Karen. I think you answered that for the previous question, option C. Bahira, can you define transfer payments, please? They're paid to the governments to people in need. You could say that. Like subsidy, no. Yeah, you could say that as well. But the thing is, the fundamental difference between any other form of payment is that something that is spent on an economic activity is considered as the government's expenditure that creates economic value. You understand that when government initiates a project, it creates something of value, it creates jobs, it creates a product, right, at the end of the process. But a transfer payment is simply when the government taxes the rich people, or it earns its revenues through various sources, and then it uses those funds, it transfers those funds to those people from whom it does not gain anything and does not create any product in the process. So let's say that the pensions for elderly people, these could be considered as transfer payments because these elderly people that are being paid are not contributing towards any economic activity. Understand? Welfare payments to sick people means it's a payment which is made for the benefit of the society, but it does not create a product. It does not create economic activity. Spending on hospitals means that there will be hospitals built and there will be a provision of a service. People could benefit. The healthcare sector would benefit due to the hospitals. Right? Payment to unemployed workers, again, the same thing. These people are not employed. They're not adding any economic value. They're not contributing towards the total output that is being produced in the economy. So that's also transfer payment, right? Defense spending is a spending on, producing ammunition and producing tanks and producing all the defense equipment and carrying out the tasks which are necessary for the security of the country. So it achieves something. Right? Teachers' salaries, again, teachers are perhaps going to teach in the public universities, schools, right? And obviously they're going to create something of value. A school provides something of value, that is educational services, right? So the transfer payments here are your pensions, your welfare payments, and your payment to unemployed workers. So it's going to be 500, which is option B. All right, for question number 19, what would be certain to cause a fall in country's cost of living? A fall in real incomes? Just by having low income, it does not mean that the cost of living reduces. It's that you won't be able to afford anymore. A fall in the inflation rate, If the inflation rate falls, the cost of living could still continue to rise because the price of goods and services are rising, but they're rising at a lower pace now than they did in the prior years. So you can say in the previous year. So inflation still exists. That means prices in general are still rising, but they're rising at a lower pace, at a lower rate. So that's your fall inflation rate. So that would also not reduce your cost of living, but it would rather increase the cost of living, right? A negative inflation rate means that it's deflation, you could say. Yeah, deflation would be certain to cause a fall in the cost of living. Thus, option C is the correct answer. Good, Fahida. C is the answer, and Karen, correct choice. Original direct tax rate. Well, all right. What is not an aim of protectionism? What is not an aim of protectionism? You guys know what protectionism is. To improve the balance of trade is an aim of protectionism. To increase the price of exports could possibly be, let's read the other options as well. To protect infant industries is, to reduce the volume of imports is, to increase the price of exports. You can say that, yeah, it's B, right? B would not be the, all are, but it's one of them is not an aim. You have to understand that. The main aim of the protectionism is to achieve economic goals, all right? And you need to understand here, the thing is that the government wishes that its export revenues increase, not export prices. Increase in export prices would actually improve your terms of trade, right? But the objective of protectionism is to correct the balance of trade to some degree, and that could be achieved, usually that would be achieved with lower export prices, which lead to higher volumes of export. You understand that there's a difference between price and there's a difference between volume. That's how they try to confuse you. That's why they said that to reduce the volume of imports, not to reduce the price of imports, to reduce the volume of imports. They make the imports appear more expensive because of tariffs, and the total value of imports that's been imported reduces. And they sometimes give subsidies to the exporters. So because of that, the price of export goes down, but the value of export increases. Yes, Karen. So B, expensive exports would decrease the demand for these goods in foreign markets. So yeah, B is not a name of protectionism. Good answer. Moving on to the next one. A country with a fixed exchange rate experiences a high rate of inflation than its trading partners. A country with a fixed exchange rate experiences a higher rate of inflation What is likely effect on the country's volume of exports and imports? You need to understand that if the exchange rate is the same, it's unchanged, and if the inflation is increasing, that means your export prices are increasing. When the export prices increase, of course, the volume of exports would decrease. It's very similar to what we discussed just now. And if it's inflation is rising, that means domestically the goods and services are becoming more expensive. The imports should, Fahira, it should increase as well. The import should also increase because your local production is becoming more expensive because of very high inflation within the economy. So there's no inflation outside of the economy. So the imports are still continue to be cheap, or they are cheaper than what you're producing domestically because you're experiencing inflation in your country. So imports could possibly increase and your exports would decrease. Make sense? Does that make sense, Fahira? For the first part, you are correct that your exports are going to decrease because of inflation. Your exports will become more expensive and inflation rate is same. So exports are going to decrease because of higher export prices due to inflation. So A and B, either of these options could be correct. C and D is not correct. But when we look at the other section of the answer, imports, with increasing inflation in your own country, the other countries' products now become more attractive. So imports become more attractive because there is no inflation in other countries. So imports are going to rise. You understand? That's the reason why we say that imports are rising. I hope you've understood it. Moving on to the next one, question number 22. A sudden rise in the price of imported oil caused the annual rate of inflation in a given period to be higher than expected. A sudden rise in the price of imported oil caused the annual rate of inflation in a given period to be higher than expected. What might be a likely result of this? You're saying borrowers would gain because there has been more inflation. So the loan, which needs to be paid back, tends to become cheaper now in terms of real value of money, because they might not be paying as much value back, right? Yeah, so that's true. The borrowers would gain. So usually during a period of high inflation, though the price of oil is just here for no reason, it was unnecessary detail that they inserted into the question. When there's a period of high inflation, right? During inflation, if let's say if I borrowed funds from person A, if I borrowed $100,000, that $100,000 could buy me a car, right? And because of inflation, the car is now worth way more than $100,000. So I can sell that car and I can pay back my borrowings, right? And the difference would be my gain. So despite having been charged interest, I could still make some gain out of it, right? Or perhaps my interest expense would decrease, which in itself is a gain. So borrowers would gain, right? In real terms, I'm benefiting off of it. Okay, what may increase the benefits a country gains from international trade? What may increase the benefits a country gains from international trade? Fahira, you're saying A reduction in the transport cost because of a fall in the world oil prices. It has got nothing to do with the oil price. We're not talking about that here. A domestic reduced transportation prices, a reduction in transport costs because of a fall in the world oil prices. Let's read the question again. What may increase the benefits a country gains from international trade? Okay. Karen, you're also saying option A, a reduction in the transport cost because of a fall. Okay, what may, so yeah, I've not read the other options. A reduction in the transportation cost, that's true. That if the transportation cost is cheaper, this would increase the trade between countries, right? And it increases the benefits a country gains from international trade. The trade would increase because of cheaper transportation costs now, right? Yeah, that's correct. The other options, we can just ignore it then. Both of you have written A, that's correct. Yes, access to cheaper oil. No, it's not like that. It's the question here, like I was also wondering it, what's that? The thing is that because of cheap oil prices, it's not about access to cheaper oil. Karen, that's exactly what I was thinking as well. We're getting it wrong there. You see, what may increase the benefits a country gains from international trade? What they're indirectly saying is that what may cause an increase in the international trade itself. So because of cheap oil prices, what's happening is that the cost of transportation has gone down. And because of cheap transportation or reduced transportation prices, there's an increase in international trade. You got it? Fahira got that one. And also you answered the same, you also chose the same option, right? Both of you are correct. But it's just that, you know, you need to have the correct perspective. So that's why I can't explain it to you. All right. The world trade price of cars in country Y is $10,000. At this price, domestic car producers supply 100,000 cars to the market and domestic consumers purchase 200,000 cars. The government of country Y imposes 10% tariff on imported cars. So domestically, the producer is supplying 100,000 cars and the market is purchasing 200,000 cars. That means this 100,000 additional cars which the market demands, which the domestic consumers purchase, they're being imported into country Y, right? $10,000 is the price tag. The government of country Y imposes 10% tariff on imported cars. So when there are 10% tariff on imported cars, what's going to happen? Under which conditions will the tariff raise the most revenue for the government? The price last year supply, the price of demand for cars in country Y. So do you understand that, the tariff will raise the most revenue for the government if the demand tends to be inelastic for the cars? The more inelastic the demand is, the more it's likely to raise the tariff for the government. As far as the supply is concerned, again, I would say if the suppliers are not, the domestic suppliers are not able to respond and to be able to capture the market from the foreign producers, then most of the market would still be yeah. Do you guys have any perspective on that one? I would need to draw a diagram here. I would need to draw a diagram on that one here. It's not about elasticity, it's in more depth. Let me try and explain it to you guys. What happens is we must draw a diagram. I will just try and use my touchpad to draw the diagram temporarily. All right. So here we go, right? The price, let's say, is $10,000, right? This price the car producers supply 100,000 units of cars. The market domestic power purchase 200,000 cars. So let's say at this price point, at 10K, let's say this line is for 10K. This is where the demand is, 200,000 cars, right? And the suppliers are providing you 100,000 cars. Let's say this is the domestic supply, this is domestic demand, this is international price, right? This gap here, it represents that this much is being imported. If the price went up by 10%, right? If your price lost to supply, if that's elastic for car producers in country Y, what's going to be the impact on the total cars that are still demanded from the foreign markets, from the in the form of imports? You see, your supply curve, the more inelastic it is, the less responsive it would be. So if the curve was sort of more vertical, more inelastic, it would mean that as the price went up by 10%, you see, the suppliers would not have responded that much. So there would continue to be gap between the demand, the local demand and the local supply. And that gap would be filled by imported products. And hence the tariff would generate the highest revenue, the most revenue. Similarly, let's say if the price went up and the demand started to shrink quite rapidly, that would mean that there will be less gap, and that less gap would need to be filled due to its fewer imports. So with fewer imports, the tax revenue would be less. So we are assuming that your demand curve is also now kind of more inelastic. So with that increase in the price, you see there still would be more gap. The more the gap continues to persist, the more this gap is going to be filled because of imports, and obviously that would generate more revenue for the government. Do you understand? So we go with which option, guys? Yeah, with which option do we go? I've given you the answer now. If you've understood it, you would be able to give me the correct answer. Yes, Karen. Let me now highlight in blue one, green. All right. So let's say if we are going with the domestic, let me just label the diagram as well. All right. So this is your domestic demand. This is your domestic supply. Come on, just hold on. This is your supply, all right? Domestic supply, you guys know that this is domestic supply. This is the international price that was at 10K, right? 10K, all right. And it went up, the price went up to 11K. It increased by 10%, right? When the price went up, considering the original demand and supply curves, you see this gap was imports. This here would have been the imports now. But if your demand and supply curves are more inelastic, in blue, I'm going to highlight to you where your imports would stand here, between these 2 points. Because your demand and supply curves, considering this here, are more sort of inelastic, they're more sort of inelastic, the gap continues to persist, and that gap is still being filled through imports. Is it making sense? I do not have my graphic tablet. If I had it, I would have drawn the, more elaborative diagram, but I've just tried to do as much as I can with the resources that I have as of now, and I believe it should be enough for you to understand the concept. Fahira, can you understand it? In the blue is your supply and demand curves are inelastic, and we see that gap continues to persist. In red, the demand and supply curves were, in green, the demand and supply curves that are being labeled with green pen, it shows that there's a huge shrinkage in the gap between demand and supply. And this shrinkage means that the imports are being reduced. Right, but the imports are being reduced to a lesser degree if your demand and supply curves are inelastic. So the most inelastic option here is 0.5 for price elastic supply, inelastic supply, and the price elastic supply at minus 0.5 is the most price inelastic demand here is minus 0.5. So we're going to go with the combination of 0.5 plus 0.5 minus 0.5. So the correct answer would be option A. All right. So this doubt is now cleared. Let us move on to the next question, guys. A country has a balance of trade deficit. When will this be least likely to be improved as a result of depreciation of its currency? Least likely to be improved. You see, when the currency depreciates in its value, the exports tend to rise and the imports tend to reduce, right? And the deficit, actually, the balance of payments, balance of trade improves. So the deficit kind of narrows down, or you could perhaps go into surplus as well. So when is it least likely to be improved? It is currently operating with a significant amount of unused resources. If the sum of the price demand and exports imports is less than 1. Yes, which is the correct option? Karen and Fahira. Karen goes with option B. Fahira, what would you go with? B, because of Marshall-Lennox condition. Exactly. We've studied that before. The Marshall-Lennox condition is the price elasticity for both exports and imports should in combination be more than 1. So that the depreciation of the currency, which actually affects the imports and export prices, has an impact on the volume of the trade, volume of the total exports and imports. If the price elasticity is less than 1, that means that because of the depreciation of the currency, the trade deficit would actually, in effect, increase rather than the situation improving. The situation would become worse. So the demand for the imports should be more, the elasticities for the exports and imports should be more than 1. The price of demand should be more than 1 for there to be an impact of a depreciation of currency. That's your Marshall-Lennox condition. Good answers. Moving on, which statement about trade protection is correct? A tariff results in greater decrease in demand for an import. The lower its price elasticity of demand. That would not be true, right? Why would that not be true? Because the more price inelastic the demand tends to be, the less impact it has. Embargoes are only an effective trade barrier when the demand for the import is price elastic. Even when the price is inelastic, embargoes means total ban. So embargoes are effective even when the demand for imports is price inelastic, right? For option C, export subsidies to domestic firms will prevent the dumping of foreign products in the domestic market. That's not true, because export subsidies do not affect your imports. So there is still a chance of dumping of foreign products in the domestic market. Quotas are less effective than tariffs for raising government revenue. That's correct, as you guys have pointed out, option D. Because quotas simply are a limit to the total quantity that could be imported. Tariffs are the taxes that would raise revenue. Quotas are a limit. They're not banned. Fahira, that's wrong. That's a wrong concept. You could say embargoes means that you are totally preventing the trade, but quotas means that you are restricting the total quantity of goods that could be imported into a country. Is a limit, yes. Yeah. So they're less effective because they're not going to generate any revenue for the government, but tariffs are going to generate revenue, right? Because you're kind of making the imports expensive. You're not setting a limit to the number of goods that are being imported. All right. Which type of policy would have the most immediate effect in dealing with a deflationary economic downturn? Increasing the government's budget surplus. That would actually reduce the total expenditure, so that's not going to be effective. Increasing the borrowing by assisting banks to lend more. Let's look into the other options as well, right? Investing in the long-term projects to improve transport networks. This is a long-term solution, right? And it's a deflationary economic downturn. People are spending less. So what the government needs to do is it needs to use an expansionary policy. Switching the burden of taxation from earning to spending. This one, I don't know what exactly they do mean by that, switching the burden of taxation. Yeah, that's not going to make any difference, because earning and spending the tax, that means that the tax could be imposed on the earnings, or it could be imposed on the VAT in the form of VAT on the spending. But that would not make that much of a difference. As much of a difference here, it would, that would have other implications. But the most appropriate solution here, the most immediate effect is going to be when there's an increase in borrowing by assisting banks to lend more. This is your expansionary monetary policy. You understand? This is a very simple, straightforward answer, and we both have gone for that option. So yeah, that's the correct one. The D one is an interesting, I would like to go into the more depth of it, but you know, B is a very straightforward answer, and D, I just for your explanation, I could go into more depth of it, but we're running out of time. So we'll just stop it there. For question number 28, which combination identifies a main aim of supply side policy and a measure used to achieve this target? Which combination identifies a main aim of supply side policy and a measure used to achieve the target? So for economic growth, deregulation is the policy measure. For full employment, increasing the money supply. For income inequality, a supply side policy measure and a measure used to achieve this target. Income inequality, more progressive taxation, and more progressive taxation, stable prices, decreasing interest rates, so people have less to spend. Deregulation is your supply side policy measure. You understand? Increasing money supply is your monetary policy, which is a demand side policy. More progressive taxation, again, demand side. Decreasing interest rates, monetary policy, demand side. So your supply side policy measure is deregulation with the name of economic growth. So for question number 28, yes, you go with option A. Moving on to the next question, question number 29. Deflation associated with persistent falling prices, falling price levels. Which government policy would be most effective to prevent deflation? Imposing maximum price levels on basic foodstuffs. Improving consumer confidence by reducing sales taxes. Increasing income tax rates and increasing government borrowing. Increasing income tax rates. So that would be a contractionary policy. Again, it's not good. Removing economic uncertainty and encouraging business investment. Improving consumer confidence by reducing sales taxes. So is it going to be B or is it going to be D? Both of you have gone for D, which is correct. Because obviously that just by reducing the sales taxes, it's going to spur more spending, but the prices are going to further go down because the taxes have been reduced, right? But here with an encouraged business environment, there's expenditure, there's more investment, there's increase in spending. You know, the business activity would pick up, more investment in order for price levels to increase. Yes, correct, Fahira. The last question, the graph shows inflation rate over 10 years for selected emerging economies. Inflation year on year from 2009 up until 2000, just let me see the diagram here, 2018. So, yeah, let's look at the question. The government central bank sets target minimum inflation rates before readjusting interest rates to stabilize the economy. If the minimum inflation rate target set by the central bank was 4% per year, at which point would they allow the interest rates to fall? Because, you know, when the interest rate falls, inflations are expected to rise. So at which point would they allow the interest rate to fall? At point Y and point, yeah, tell me the answer, guys. Yeah, you get in for option C, which is correct. Fahira. At point Y and point Z. Why point Y and point Z? Because you see the inflation rate at 4%. It should be, you see, the inflation should be below 4% for us to be able to reduce the interest rate, because when we reduce the interest rate, there will be an increase in spending, which would cause the inflation rates to rise. If we are already above 4%, which is our targeted rate of inflation, and if you're reducing the interest rates, then that would not be a good, or that would not be in line with our policy of the maximum interest rate of a minimum inflation rate of 4%. If we want to establish a minimum inflation of 4%, we should only be reducing the interest rates when we are below 4%. That means we have achieved our target. Only then can we allow for there to be inflation, or else we should try and prevent the inflation so as to achieve our minimum target rate for inflation. I hope you've understood this last question, right? Point Y and point Z is the correct answer. The thing is, the screen's too small. I was not able to kind of, you know, put in the whole question into the screen. I would have to zoom out, but I hope you guys have like understood it. The simple explanation is that for as long as your inflation rate is less than 4%, you're allowed to reduce the interest rates, which would have an effect on inflation, as it would rise as soon as we reduce the interest rates. We can only use expansionary policy measures which cause inflation when we have achieved the inflation targets first. So that was it. I think we're done with all the 30 questions. You guys can see for yourselves how many questions you got wrong and what questions you found difficulty. I hope the video benefits you all. I kind of recorded the video as well. And if you guys have any further doubts, you guys can ask me here, Karen, Fahira. If there are no doubts, perhaps we're going to end the class. All right, Karen, Fahira, wish you all the best for the practice sessions that you're going to continue to do up until your exams. And good luck. See you guys tomorrow, inshallah, if you can make up time for the class. All right. Goodbye. Take care, both of you.